So welcome everybody to today's Secure Chain Con panel discussion on actionable metrics and metadata. So let's meet our panelists. Tracy, why don't you go first and introduce yourself?
Well, I'm the easy one. I think most of us in the Ortelius community know who I am. I am Tracy Ragan, the CEO and co-founder of DeployHub. I would call the probably the community director for Ortelius and do a lot of the outreach. I'm also involved in the OpenSSF and the CDF, and I'm not new to open source and its issues.
Off to you, John.
Thank you, Steve. I am John Linford. I am with an organization called the Open Group. We are an international standards consortium, so we operate with our member organizations to help define standards and best practices across a wide variety of topics. I am specifically our security portfolio forum director, so responsible for a lot of the standards and certification programs around cybersecurity and supply chain security.
Great. Thanks for being here today. And finally, Luigi.
Hi, Steve and everyone. I am Luigi Gubello, a senior security engineer at Pitch, and I am an active contributor in OpenSSF Science 2021, in particular in the working group related to metrics and metadata.
Great. Thank you so much for being here as well. So let's dive into our questions. Let me find them. So I think I'm going to start with Tracy. So Tracy, why is it important to define security metrics, and why are we doing it now instead of earlier or down the road?
Well, I think that we started talking about open source security after the Log4j incident. I think that we believed that maybe that was going to be our last big incident. But everybody got more interested in tracking at least open source security. And I think what we're learning is that we have really complex systems today, and humans alone cannot really track all of the crazy dependencies that we have. And one dependency with a vulnerability can impact, literally thousands of downstream components, like we saw with Log4j. And we continue to have bad issues that come up. We were at Open Source Summit a couple of weeks ago, and the news was all about the XZ backdoor issue, which hit the Linux kernel, which is horrible and embarrassing for the Linux Foundation. But I think they did a great job of being transparent and stopping that. But the point is, we need to start seeing historical data. We need to start seeing the flow of information coming through. And we need to start thinking about what metrics and metadata is important. So I think that's why it's important today. And please, my fellow panelists, if you have something to say on that topic, please do.
I think there's also probably a component of just how much now organizations are really tracking. They've realized how important being able to track those metrics are, and being able to accumulate them and use them for making those business decisions. So I think it's kind of been maybe self-feeding is the right way to describe that. Organizations realized how important these metrics are, so they've started to really pay attention to them. So they've started to go looking for more of these metrics. So they're just getting more and more used to collecting them and using them to help inform their decisions.
And what type of analysis do you foresee that people are going to do on these types of metrics?
I think quantitative analysis will be ideal there. I mean, if you've got numbers, if you can go looking for trends, historical numbers of events, size of the losses that have manifested from these kinds of events that have happened, you're able to start having conversations in the same terms as business decisions are being made. So in monetary terms, economic terms. So now when you're starting to have conversations about what kind of security do I need to be putting in place, what mitigations or controls do I need to enact, where should I be investing in my organization's infrastructure or the protections that I should be using, you're actually able to say, it's going to cost us this much money, but it's going to prevent a loss of this magnitude from happening in the future. So rather than just it's a really high risk of this happening, you're able to say, well, we might lose $1 billion twice over the next 5 years. So there's maybe some ways that we can prioritize our spending.
Right. And on that quantitative risk analysis, right now there is a huge dispersed formats of the information. So this is kind of over to Luigi. You know, how do, because I know this is your area of expertise, how do we go about standardizing this security information and metrics and metadata so we can actually do the quantitative analysis that John's talking about?
Yeah, currently company and organization are understanding why security metrics and metadata are important. They try to collect information about their supply chain software, for example, packages, third-party packaging software. But it's hard for them to collect and aggregate this kind of data because there is no specific format or a specific piece of information that you can collect from everyone. So one of the challenges that the company have is try to understand which metrics everyone should have and which metrics they should every time ask to the maintainers or to the other company that provide the software. It's something that we are seeing that that company it's a problem that we see that companies try to solve. And at the moment, we have still not a specific standard for this.
And you know, the metrics right now, and the analysis has everything to do with threat modeling. I feel like there's a lot of groups doing threat modeling right now, but I think that the data is going to be essential for threat modeling and predicting how good a threat model is and correcting it.
Yeah, it's a good point. The interesting things about threat modeling is that according to the threat model, maybe you want to have some specific metric or metadata. For example, if you don't have, if your software is not exposed to internet, probably you are not interested to specific metrics or information. And this is why it's not so easy for company to ask and collect data. From my personal perspective and experience, we should start with some basic metrics that you want to have every time for every software. At least you have a baseline. And then according to the threat model that you have, you can ask for more. And a company, an organization, or a software provider should just adapt the metrics that they offer to their customer according to the software purpose or the piece of code purpose.
So I'm going to put John on the spot here. And what would be the number one piece of metrics or metadata that we should be starting to collect?
Oh gosh, ooh, that's a big question.
I know. That's why I'm going to put you on the spot there.
It's a question all of us are asking over and over, right?
You know, I think there are a couple of, I'm going to kind of broaden it out beyond just a single organization. There are a couple of really good sources of information out there now about historical losses. So for instance, the Scientia Institute puts out a ton of research that they're collecting on the magnitude of losses and what the distribution of those losses look like from a cyber incident that any organization can take a look at and factor into their models and, you know, tweak or massage based on what they're seeing for themselves as opposed to broader industry trends. There's also organizations like FIRST with their EPSS, the Exploit Predictivity Scoring System. Hopefully I've gotten that acronym correct, where they're actually looking at the CVEs and exploits of those CVEs over the previous 30 days and then running it through their open algorithm for predicting how often those are going to be exploited in the next 30 days. So now you've got two good sources of information for how big are the losses when they do manifest based on what other organizations have seen, even if you're lucky enough not to have experienced those losses before, tied to what's the probability one of these vulnerabilities are going to be exploited. So now you've got an idea of it's a 99% sure thing it's going to happen to us, and here's how big the loss is going to be when it does happen. And then ultimately, ideally, that will tie back into your threat modeling process where you've done the initial threat modeling, you have an idea of what mitigations or controls should be enacted and have enacted those. And now you've got these updated data where you can go through that threat modeling process again and run it iteratively to see, how is this improved? Do my mitigations or controls need to change? Or is this even something I should be concerned about? Do we already have this so well protected that we don't need to be concerned about this specific loss?
And Tracy, do you think as part of that data that John's talking about in establishing what level of risk we're at, that DevOps data should be part of that as well?
Well, as you know, the Ortelius community on DeployHub are pretty focused on what we would call DevSecOps data. Now, why is why is the DevOps important with the security information? And that has to do with the ability to potentially apply auto remediation to the process. So, for example, if you know where an object is being consumed by, let's just look at a decoupled architecture, because that's the hardest thing to solve. You have an organization that have thousands of microservices running out there, and they're shared across multiple applications. You have a vulnerability. What you really want to be able to do is identify as quickly as possible where that container is running and rebuild it and redeploy it. Now, this is a number I repeat because it's a shocking one. According to JFrog and some of their surveys in 2023, they claimed it was taking 227 days to get that task done. You know, it's a team of people working for, I don't know, 5 or 6 weeks to get everything updated and cleaned up just for one high-risk vulnerability. So if we begin tracking and mapping SBOM versions with release versions and the release versions with the environments they're installed to for every component and aggregate that up to where applications are being impacted, then that DevOps data can give us a better understanding of what customers are being impacted and how quickly we can get it updated, and potentially we can apply AI remediation to the process. Because at that point, if you know a new package, you can easily go out and find the new package. This is what a human would do: get the remediated package, rebuild your container, and redeploy it. But we should be able to do that in an automated way. So what we're talking about is increasing how rapid we can respond to these problems, because we may not be able to statically code scan our way out of the process. And we may not be able to threat model our way out of the process, but we can learn to respond quickly. And that's why the DevOps information is important to be part of that analysis. And it starts giving us an idea of the flow of open source coming through the supply chain. We start being able to see why was suddenly Log4j one of the most popular packages everybody wanted to consume. And if everybody's consuming it, it's going to be something that's high risk. And that kind of data is important. And a lot of that's found at the build. And where's the build? In the DevOps pipeline. So security and DevOps are so closely related that we really can't separate them or the metrics.
Yeah, I know for a long time we haven't really tied the two together very, there's been like you said, I would say more of a one-off type of thing or afterthought to address security in your software. It's just been a bad habit. Developers just don't have the time to deal with it, and so we have that scenario. But when we look at like you said, we have tons of stuff that we're consuming, and this kind of goes over to Luigi. How do we, when we look at the whole ecosystem, let's take the CNCF. How can we get the data out of the CNCF to understand the risk of consuming some, Kubernetes, for example, from the CNCF or a specific version of Kubernetes? Are there any tools or ways that we can get that information up and organized?
Yeah, it's a good question. Connecting for a second to this topic about DevOps and security, I totally agree. not just the software, but the entire infrastructure, the entire perimeter should be written as much as possible, of course, as code. So we should be able to read the infrastructure. We should be able to understand what we have deployed by reading a code, at least try to map the entire infrastructure, the entire perimeter in a sort of written document that we can scan and analyze, like a YAML, for example. It's very common for this kind of things. And this can help us to be able to mitigate quickly or to patch quickly specific vulnerable packages. Even if it's not so easy, because sometimes you have the remediation, sometimes you know that you have an outdated packages, but you cannot just deploy it because maybe your version was too old and you have a production environment that could be broken by this update. So it's not so basic, even if you can map, you can know the perimeter and where are all the artifacts. And about the source of trust, for example, know the version, know a specific, try to understand if a particular package is vulnerable or not. So the source of the data are usually external. An example is the CVE database. Currently, the entire security ecosystem is based on a sort of non-profit organization that try to keep updated a database of vulnerabilities. But there are some limits, and we are seeing now this. The number of vulnerabilities that a researcher or company share publicly is exploding in the last year, and probably it will continue to grow faster and faster. And it's difficult to understand if a CVE is a real vulnerability or not. So there are disputes about this. And the question is how we should in the future track this kind the vulnerabilities in the software. Should be the company accountable for this, and we have already some companies that are a CNA, but also for the open source project. Currently, to know if an open source project is vulnerable, to know which vulnerabilities you can have in a specific version of Kubernetes, for example. That is not the best example, in my opinion, because the standards are very high, but commonly the open source project don't have maybe a security process or a big team. But the point is that, just reading the code of a specific open source project, you don't have an easy way to know if that specific version is vulnerable. If the maintainer are pay attention to the security, maybe they add in their logs, in the change log, this information, but often there is any CVE or just from the repo, you cannot collect this kind of information. So currently, the security ecosystem is based on source of data that are maintained by organization. And in the future, maybe we should understand how to be sure that this kind of source of data can be continued to be updated, can be maintainable. And probably, I don't know if a central system will be the solution.
Yeah, so that does bring up an interesting point when you're talking about the maintainers. Once we start gathering this metrics and metadata, and we realize that they're like kind of what Tracy is alluding to, a highly used package that has one maintainer. I remember this happened a couple years ago. I believe it was an NPM module that the maintainer, somebody pissed off the maintainer, and he went and deleted the repo.
Yeah.
And what do we do in that scenario? So I'm going to throw out the group, just get a comment from each one of you. What do we do with these single maintainer projects? Even though there wasn't a vulnerability, it still caused a huge ripple effect.
Well, for example, for that, we need to consider one fact. A lot of the open source projects are maintained by one person or very small team. So this kind of incident can happen. There are solutions, for example, to prevent big outage if the maintainer delete the packages from, technically not the project, they just delete the packages from the packager manager ecosystem, in that case NPM. And that is caching your own software. In this way, if there is an error, you don't update the software. A caching system is an advanced solution usually. If you have a small team, probably you just trust to NPM, and this is a problem. So the solution is create a caching system of the package manager that you use. In this way, you can prevent or you can quickly restore the packages. But in the real life, when you have a software that is maintained by a single maintainer, the risks are high. We have seen also for the XZ incident. A single maintainer asked for help to maintain the packages, and the new developer was a rogue one. Honestly, there is no, I don't see any easy solution for this kind of incident. Because even if you wait, even if you cache packages, you are waiting before proceeding with an update. And this means that if there is a critical vulnerability, you are adding a delay. And so you are offering a time advantage for the attacker. So it is a real threat model where we need to balance which kind of risk we are able to accept, in my opinion. Yeah, even if there is always the risk that a maintainer can be a rogue one, this is not so common. It's more common a human error in the code base than a rogue maintainer, at least for now. In the future, let's see. It seems to be a threat, honestly.
What's your thoughts, John?
Yeah, I want to build on the human aspect that you just mentioned, Luigi, and kind of pull back to what Tracy was saying about getting sec into DevSecOps and the importance of having people as part of that process. Even if you're part of an organization where, well, probably most organizations, your developers aren't security experts. Having somebody to speak on behalf of the security team as part of the process from the very beginning, as part of the decisions, or reminding people as they're making these decisions for what OSS they're going to use, maybe part of that should be a reminder to look at, is this one person maintaining it? Where is that one person located? Is there any sort of historical, negative reputation about this person? Have they had other projects that they've been the sole maintainer and maybe done some not so nice things with? Having a security, we'll call it, say, champion, even if they're not a true security expert or practitioner, as part of those teams can hopefully help prevent some of those issues from the beginning. Of course, sometimes there aren't alternatives to having or to selecting options that is just that sole maintainer, but at least you'll have factored that into the decision process from the beginning. It is a sole maintainer. So now you have, certain parts of that you're monitoring maybe a little bit more closely or keeping a closer eye on, so that as situations change, you already know to keep an eye on it and it's not hitting you after the fact. You're not finding out last.
Well, that brings up an interesting point, which I never really thought about. I've always focused on the metrics and metadata of the software that we're writing, and the packages that we're consuming. But should we collect metrics and metadata on the maintainers themselves? I mean, it gets into a sticky situation where you're going to start profiling people.
Well, first of all, I want to chime in on this topic before we get to that second one. I think we have to put some responsibility on the consumers of these open source packages. Now, if we're tracking the right metrics and metadata, and we're providing some dashboarding information for consumers, and we show them, hey, you're consuming 15 projects that may be supported by just one contributor, and you have another 50 that are supported by 2, then they themselves know what their responsibility is and what their risk is. And they themselves can decide if they want to put some of their team members and pay some of their team members to put them on the projects to help support it. If we did that, I mean, we would have a lot of open source contributors, right? If there was some ownership from the consumer side. The other thing that I believe that we could do from an educational standpoint is I wish our university systems would have an open source course that students were required to do before they graduated. That said, you know, 1 quarter or 1 semester, you are going to be involved in an open source community so that they can begin understanding the security around open source. They can understand how critical open source is, and we can add to the committer pool. So we have to find more committers, and there are 2 ways to do that. First would be having ownership from the consumer side, because we have a lot of very large companies. I mean, Log4j was supported by one individual for years and years and years, and not a single corporation pitched in and said, "I'm going to make sure that this is a sustainable module that we can use internally." And they don't want to write it, but certainly they could have had one of their common code developers be part of that community. And universities need to think about it in a bigger way. Now I don't remember what your other question was, Steve. Sorry.
About collecting metrics and metadata on maintainers and people.
Oh, okay, yes. That can be pretty dicey, right?
Yeah.
But we already have, the Linux Foundation tried to do something like this with their LFX tools. But I believe that if you have a way to say this contributor has been contributing to many, many different projects, that they may have a higher value, right? It would be great to create kind of a badging system within the open source community that contributors who are really working hard for some of these open source projects get better recognition. And it would elevate the value of the repository that contributor's working on. I think it's a great idea, and I wish there was more recognition for contributors who are doing a great job. As Luigi said, not everybody's trying to do nefarious things. Most of them are doing things from their heart and working hard to contribute. So yes, let's figure out a way to evaluate them and give them good badges.
Well, I'm going to kind of push back on that a little bit. That I would agree, most developers are doing good, but because we've been doing so much work with the CV databases, you just go out to OSV Dev and you look at some of the vulnerabilities being reported, and it's like a Python package that sounds great. It's like AI film editor, is the package, and you think it's the greatest package ever, and you look at the doc, it's all looks good. There's actual real code behind it, but it's actually a backdoor malicious package. It's one of those, the developers, we just go out, we don't like writing stuff. We just like using other people's stuff. So, we go out and find the thing that sounds the closest to what we need, and then we get hit down the road.
And that's why we need AI to start doing some zero trust policy remediation. And that's why metrics and metadata is important.
So we're coming to the end here. So I'm just going to throw out one last question to the group. I'm going to start with John. Do you think we can get to zero trust?
That's a loaded question for me, because we are actively working on defining standards around zero trust and zero trust architecture. I think some of the automation that is sort of underpinning a realistic implementation of zero trust, especially at a really large organization, I think that's still developing. I think that's still coming along. I think full implementation of quantitative risk analysis and being able to make real-time decisions based on those quantitative analyses is also still coming along. We're not quite there, especially at a really large organization scale. Some of these analyses can take a not insubstantial amount of time to run to be able to make those decisions. But I think we're making good progress. I think we've got folks who are acknowledging that this is a really important thing to be able to do. We can't just have this implied trust that just because you're in the perimeter or just because you are an employee of an organization, we can implicitly trust you. So that zero implied trust, not just zero trust, I think is an important distinction. But then we're also now seeing more emphasis on I'll use the cliche security being a team sport. Everybody in your organization has some security responsibility related back to that organization. It's not just the security team who should be stepping in and slapping wrists and saying, no, you've done something wrong. There's an educational aspect of this that we're also seeing progress toward, where every employee knows it's a bit of their responsibility.
What do you think, Luigi? Can we get to zero trust?
It's a very hard challenge, in my opinion. And honestly, I don't know. I don't know if I have a strong opinion on this question. I think that we can delegate a part of this trust, as John said, to the employee or so and so. I don't know if we can achieve the zero trust, but we can improve this project, at least for some project. At the same time, I think it's hard when an open source project is maintained by a single maintainer or a small team that is not a company or an organization. But maybe everyone use that particular script. There are a lot of cryptography library or old standard library, like, I don't know, archive library, for example, the compressor and compress, or XZ is an example, but I was thinking about zip, for example. And that maybe were written years ago because the standards are old, and maybe starting from a university or a college, so from a safe place or a sort of organization you can trust, but then in the year they're maintained by the same person that totally changed their life. So for this reason, I think that it can work if we delegate part of the process, but it's not zero trust, as said by John.
Got it. And for you, Tracy?
We can't now. We're not there now. We don't have the data now, I don't think. I think there was some level of zero trust that we might be able to achieve. I know things like companies like Tidelift are working on this for looking at open source, but we don't have all of the data. But I trust that thought leaders like John, who's one of the leaders at the Open Group, and Luigi, who's one of the leaders at the OpenSSF, I think that when everybody starts putting their mind to what metrics we should be gathering, then we can start defining what zero trust even means, because that's part of the problem. As John pointed out, what are the standards for zero trust? Once we can define the standards, and we can figure out what data we need to define to implement those standards, and then we'll have to start collecting it, and then we'll get to zero trust. But I think we have a way to go before we're there.
Yeah, I kind of think it's going to be to achieve zero trust, we're going to come at it from many different directions, where we'll be going out and gathering the data that we can, and we'll be working on the standards in parallel, and we'll eventually see all the stars align down the road here, and hopefully that will come sooner than later. So any last comments, or should we just wrap this up?
I think I'll bring it back to our discussion point of the sole maintainer. We need people working on the standards and figuring out the metrics and thinking about it and having those conversations. It's not going to be one person doing it on their own who can define what zero trust is. It's going to take groups of people coming together and hashing it out.
Yeah, I would love to see the OpenSSF and the Open Group, once they have their standards and their metrics defined, come together and see how much overlaps, right?
Yeah, and that's gonna. There's just a shout out to the folks listening. Please get involved in an open source project. It doesn't have to be with the Linux Foundation or the CNCF. You can go to the Open Group, Apache, Eclipse Foundation. Pick your favorite package that you like to use in your daily development, and go check out what that maintainer's doing. Go out and help do a simple PR. It's amazing what low-hanging fruit is out there that needs to be done, but the single maintainer just doesn't have time to do it. So with that, I'd like to just thank all of our panelists today for joining in this discussion. and stay tuned with the other meetings that are happening on the Secure Chain Con 2024. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.